relationships can be hard, and for some, one-night stands and spontaneous meetups can be full of risk. That's why today's sponsor, Tantally, has come to the rescue. Yes, folks, Tantally has taken it upon themselves to open up a new world of both passions and pleasures. Made with food-grade TPE material and sporting the softest and most realistic skin textures, Tantally promises to give you an experience beyond your wildest imaginations. Tantally offers 100% discreet packaging and free shipping in over 30 countries. Use our link in the description below and you'll receive 12% off your order when you use code SPLATTER12. Huge thanks to Tantally for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to it.
Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. And back here discussing some revenge films, as has been spoiled by the thumbnail, I am sure. This one has been on my to-do list for quite a while. There's just so many great revenge films out there. I did even underestimate how many great ones there are, so I had to narrow this down to just a tiny list here. And I know what you're thinking. We're talking revenge films, so of course things like I Spit on Your Grave or Last House on the Left have to be on this list, right? Well, I did omit those. I feel like they're just so iconic in the horror space. We've all seen them. We all love them to a certain extent, depending on what you do enjoy. But they've just been discussed so much. We've talked about them on the channel. I'm sure we're going to discuss them a handful more of times. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to put those ones on the sideline. There was a lot of great films that I had to discuss on here. Some that I didn't even realize, as once we get into this list, I will talk about. But so many great ones here, and so many brutal ones. But brutal doesn't necessarily cover this. No, there's only one great word to describe it, and that is savage. So I've wasted enough of your time. Let's hop into the list. 5 savage revenge films that will leave you speechless. Kicking off the list in the number 5 spot, Blue Ruin. A mysterious outsider's quiet life is turned upside down when he returns to his childhood home to carry out an act of vengeance. Proving himself an amateur assassin, he winds up in a brutal fight to protect his estranged family. I absolutely adore this film. It has so many perfect elements that drive the narrative and display so much character development. This one's directed by Jeremy Saulnier, and I ended up checking this one out on Netflix when it was available there after becoming obsessed with Saulnier's 2015 film Green Room, R.I.P. Anton. I went in hoping to see some wonderfully gory scenes, but I wasn't expecting this beautiful, somber film with a great performance from Macon Blair. Our main character, Dwight, is this fumbling dweeb that at first glance you really wouldn't expect much out of, but he becomes a bit of a John McClane-esque character if John McClane worked in an office and liked Dungeons and Dragons. He is this unlikely hero that at a lot of time he gets in his own way and provides a lot of extra suspense to the film that wouldn't exist if he was able to pull everything off with ease. There's this funny but also tense scene where he's stabbing the tires of this car but ends up actually needing that car to get away. And it is just this perfect kind of moment of him getting in his own way and then having to try and backtrack and put a band-aid on what he had created there. The obstacles Dwight faces are kind of mundane when it comes to a lot of these hyper-violent revenge flicks, but it kind of gives the film a bit of a sense of authenticity and realism that makes this hit a little bit harder than I thought it was going to. I love that the whole root of the motivation that drives the narrative in Blue Ruin is something that could possibly resonate with people. The antagonists aren't these mega drug lords or very powerful people. It's just a family issue that was passed down to the children. Saulnier is such a master when it comes to building tension in his films. One of my favorite sequences is Dwight waiting for these invaders to show up at this house. Once they show up, Dwight sets up the house and gets prepared for a confrontation. While it doesn't have quite the finesse of Kevin McAllister, this sequence always gets my heart racing for that pending encounter that we're going to see.
This is it. Don't get scared now.
While this film has a lot of great tension, is really steeped in that authentic feel to it, it does have some gore spruce throughout. There are a couple of gory scenes. One of my favorites is we have a character that basically loses his face from a gunshot, and I absolutely love it. It's terrifying. It kind of is really jarring. You don't really expect it. But it is such a complete, well-rounded film. And this really is a love letter to a lot of creatives. Knowing what Saulnier had to go through to get this film made, you have to check this one out. I did check it out on Tubi. That's where it is right now. So if you haven't checked this one out, go load this one up after this video. You're not going to be disappointed. Hacking its way into the number 4 spot, Mandy. The enchanted lives of a couple in a secluded forest are brutally shattered by a nightmarish hippie cult and their demon biker henchmen, propelling a man into a spiraling, surreal rampage of vengeance. This is a film that I could sit here and describe to you for 2 hours straight in detail, and it still wouldn't spoil your viewing pleasure. Director Panos Cosmatos crafted this wild experience of a film. This is so robust in its style that it has to be seen. This one actually almost slipped by me when I was putting this list together, because sometimes I forget the actual story when I think back on this film, because I always think about that cinematic experience first. Mandy is one of the big catalysts that revived Nick Cage's career, and with his performance in this, it is absolutely well deserved. At the start of the film, he's just this quiet character enjoying the simple life, but as everything unfolds, we get the wildly unhinged performance from Cage that we love. One of the most iconic scenes in this film has to be Cage sitting on the toilet losing his shit. Not literally, but it is so erratic that you can feel that it might be a little bit over the top, but looking at the context of the events, I absolutely love the vibe of that scene. Just the look of the retro bathroom really complements that scene, then Cage caked in blood. It's one of those scenes that a lot of people are familiar with, even if they haven't seen the actual film, but once you see what is actually going on and what he's going through, it really gives you a different perspective on that scene. There are also a handful of familiar faces in this, like Richard Brake and Bill Duke, but an actor I was completely captivated by was Linus Roach as Jeremiah Sand. He's this cult leader of the Children of the New Dawn, and he delivers such an off-putting performance as he gives these speeches. His charisma just gives this character so much life. From an atmospheric level, Mandy reaches this height that is unachievable by a lot of other films. Every time I turn this one on, I get excited to experience it all over again. The otherworldly nature of the film opens up a lot of different avenues for terror that move past the basic revenge type of film. I always go back to my first viewing of this film. I checked it out on Shudder after hearing a lot of positive chatter online. It was the middle of the afternoon and I turned this on, and once the Black Skull Gang showed up, it gave me a new sense of terror that I was not prepared for. Especially watching this during the day, I don't get scared often, but the gang itself and what they put Nick Cage through and just showing them on screen, there's some downright gross stuff. There's a scene in here where they capture Nick Cage and he is kind of going through the house at one point. I remember actually eating while I was watching this. I had to take a break for a minute because I just lost my appetite, and that doesn't happen often, but there is a really just gross scene involving them. Mandy has so much going for it in every aspect. It's one of those must-see films of the last decade. Biting into the number 3 spot, Hard Candy. Haley's a smart, charming teenage girl. Jeff's a handsome, smooth-fashion photographer. An internet chat, a coffee shop meetup, an impromptu fashion shoot back at Jeff's place. Jeff thinks it's his lucky night. He's in for a surprise. Hard Candy was part of my earlier internet lore as I started perusing the horror forums, always mentioned with films like The Loved Ones and Wreck. This was a film that I uncovered as I was diving a little bit deeper into the horror space rather than just viewing the usual suspects. It really caught me off guard on how quickly we dive into that actual dynamic of the situation with Jeff, played by Patrick Wilson, and Haley, played by Elliot Page, then Ellen Page. Seeing this older man meet up with this young girl is already so off-putting from the very beginning, and I absolutely love the performance from Patrick Wilson here. The casting is great because it would have been such a layup to have this kind of creepy-looking predator, but instead Jeff is this clean-cut, good-looking guy who most audiences would find unimposing.
What kind of pizza we have tonight? Who's this? I'll get to that in a minute. Who are you?
One of the elements that I love about the Jeff character is this kind of methodical approach they give to his character. When we arrive at his house, we see these framed pictures of former models or victims, whatever you want to call them and what's ever most appropriate. Jeff is this meticulous predator, unlike other deviants that can be portrayed as sloppy. Looking at something like August Underground that I covered in my found footage list, where you see these murderers who have these nude women plastered messily all over their walls. Jeff's house has this almost surgical feel to it, which becomes pretty appropriate from what we're going to see a little bit later on. Haley's psychological games is what really did put me on the edge of my seat the entirety of the film. We really have no idea where this narrative is going until the very last moment when we have to digest almost every piece of the story all at once. Most of the film deals with just those two characters of Jeff and Haley, which could slow the pace down a little bit, but they really do make use of the actual scenery itself, and they're able to develop tension with these new scenarios and really keep you on your toes. One of the most iconic scenes in the film is when Jeff is tied to a table while Haley is performing a certain surgery to his character. The scene has so much tension to it, but the payoff of the scenario, when we learn of Haley's actual intention, adds so much texture to that character. It brings a new level of mindfuckery to this film. On my first viewing of this film, they built up so much great tension that I was worried that they weren't going to be able to pay it off with any sort of gratifying experience, but every time I go back and watch this one, I appreciate the conclusion that much more. I did give this one a rewatch just recently here. It is streaming on Tubi, so if you haven't checked this one out or haven't checked it out in a long time, I would highly recommend popping this one on. It is a bit of a rough watch, but I think the twists and turns in this one are rather intriguing for a revenge film. Ascending to that number 2 spot, Martyrs. Two young women who were both victims of abuse as children embark on a bloody quest for revenge, only to find themselves plunged into a living hell of depravity. This is such a different type of revenge film. It just takes so many different twists and turns, and it gets me after every rewatch. This is a French film, so if you haven't seen it, just be prepared. There are subtitles, but as we get deeper into this very dark story, there isn't a ton of dialogue at certain points, which may tell you a little bit about where we're going to go with this. This is another film that had a lot of internet lore around it because of the level of brutality it reaches. Some of the imagery in this film can really turn your stomach. The narrative here follows a really different path than what we're used to with a lot of normal revenge films. When looking at the equation that a lot of revenge films follow, we as an audience are looking for this gratification, that catharsis we're familiar with. Martyrs messes with that equation. It gives us some gratification at a certain point, but then pulls that away from us and continues to tell a story that is completely different on a very disturbing level, diving into elements of the supernatural, mental illness, complete brutality, and intertwining those into a revenge tale showcases a uniqueness you won't find with any other film. This is a film you can really only watch a handful of times, and every time I watch it, I feel mentally drained because of the second half of this film is just a marathon of pain and anguish. From a gore aspect, this film absolutely delivers from an all-out mayhem, blunt force aspect, but also a more methodical and diabolical aspect as well. There's a sequence in here where one of our characters is basically turned into a human spring roll, and watching those scenes can easily make an audience gag. Knowing the context and with how long we have to sit with those scenes, it really just amplifies of the imagery that we're seeing. This one can be a bit of a frustrating watch from the dynamic it presents, but also in its messaging. If you're looking for that kind of definitive story, you unfortunately aren't going to get it here with Martyrs. There is such a discourse in the conclusion of this film and its meaning, and it's produced a handful of theories that are interesting in their own right. This one is on Tubi right now, so if you haven't checked this one off your list, definitely do so, but do it on an empty stomach. Coming in at the number 1 spot, Revenge. Never take your mistress on an annual guy's getaway, especially one devoted to hunting. A violent lesson for 3 wealthy married men. This film is absolutely bonkers in the best way possible. From its storytelling to the amount of gore and subtext through its narrative, it's complete quality. The story itself isn't anything unique on paper, but the creative stamp Farge puts on this film shows why she is such a director to keep an eye on. She had a lot of success with The Substance last year, and while it was robbed at the Oscars, the horror community showed up in a big way for that film. Even though Revenge came out 7 years ago, the tension and flavor is so evident in her filmmaking, just like The Substance, but with a completely different feel that stands on its own. From the very beginning, we're thrown into this world with this couple, Richard, played by Kevin Jansons, and Jen, portrayed by the wonderful Matilda Lutz, as they're on this getaway. It is instantly interrupted when 2 of Richard's friends show up, and the voyeuristic behavior from one of the friends, Stan, would even put Mikey Myers to shame. I was instantly tense watching some of these scenes unfold before we even get to the truly disturbing behavior from Stan, which I will warn people who haven't seen this, there is some essay in the film. Even in those scenes, Farge somehow approaches those in a less gratuitous way than a lot of other films, but it still remains so impactful as we take it in through the lens. Even in those scenes, Farge somehow approaches those in a less gratuitous way than a lot of other films, but still remains so impactful as us, the audience, are soaking in everything that we're seeing. The fallout from that incident allows Farge to express an important commentary that both hits you in the gut and amplifies the stakes for Jen as we root for her to get the hell out of there. There's an absolutely jaw-dropping scene in here, and if you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. It's absolutely hyper-violent, and on my first watch of this, I had to pause the film and go back and rewatch it just because I could not believe what I was seeing. So that is something, if you haven't checked this out, it's worth it alone just to be able to see something like that. And even from then on, this film is spruced with a lot of great gore, and it's never an overabundance. I think it's just the right amount for us to be able to sit in it, really dissect it, and really feel a lot of pain that is going on. One of my favorite things about this film is the character of Jen. I love that she isn't this innate badass. She's just a badass because of the circumstance. She really has no other choice. Jen is really put through a lot of harrowing events from a mental standpoint, from a physical standpoint, just across the board. This really is a marathon of pain for her. And Farge just has a gift for conveying that pain through the lens, but then also putting such a style to it that while we're feeling Jen's pain, we are immediately back into the action as soon as we see another attacker show up, and we're kind of back in that instance with the action, with the gore, and wondering how this event is going to unfold, especially after we've seen so many hyper-violent things throughout the rest of the film. So this one certainly does keep you engaged, and by the time we get to the big final sequence, if you're looking for blood, well, you're going to get what you came for, because Farge does not hold back. It's absolutely satisfying for any gorehound out there. I love that sequence. It does run a little long, but I think that's the beauty of it, is we just get to sit in that scene and really just take in, soak in all that blood, and just be in awe of the actual film itself. So Farge knew how to certainly tell a fantastic revenge story that's going to leave a lasting impression on the audience. And there you have it, folks. So many great, wacky, and wild revenge flicks on this list. A couple that even almost slipped past me. Like I said, Mandy, I could not believe that one had slipped my mind, but I'm so glad that I remembered that at the final hour, so to speak, and I gave that one a rewatch because, man, what a thrill ride that one is. But I have a bunch more that did not make the cut this time around. I'm sure I'll be unpacking even more revenge flicks here in the coming months, just because there are so many. But if this is your first time on the channel and you've just stumbled upon us, please peruse, take a look, see what we've got to offer. We got a lot of reviews. We have a list every week, at least one list coming to you every week. So keep it right here on Splattercast. Give us a like, give us a share, please. We would greatly appreciate it. But until next time, I'm Luke Janesco, and stay scared.
Do the hard shit, gonna do it live, 'cause Splattercast kick it every day they live. Splattercast, gonna slash your ass. 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 Splattercast, gonna slash your ass.